Gap Report 2020. So generally, when a report is titled 2020, it gets released in 2021. It takes kind of several months for the report to get compiled. So what is emission gap? So that's the first interesting part. What does the report mean by the emission gap? So by emission gap, what is the meaning of emission gap? So we all know that in Paris Agreement there was certain attempt to keep the emission at that is keep the rise in the temperature below 2 degrees and also pursue effort to keep it below 1.5 degrees. Do you remember the first aim of Paris Agreement? So there were 3 aims of Paris Agreement, of which the first aim was we will go up till 2 degrees, and in some cases we will try to reduce it to 1.5 degrees, and all this was meant to be achieved by 2030. So the emission gap report funda is very clear. Because if we have to achieve 1.5 to 2 degrees, that is from the pre-industrial level, then what should be the projected emission as on 2020? Yeah. So if you were to make a graph like this, sorry, if you were to make a graph like this, so the emission, let's say, it needs to reach a particular level in 2030, let's say 2030, which means in 2020 the emission. So this is worldwide. This is worldwide divided country-wise later. So emission needs to reach this. So this curve is the desired curve, so that the Paris Agreement aim is met. So y-axis is your CO2 emission, x-axis is your year. Okay. So this is your year and this is your CO2. This is the desired. But what will happen in reality? The emission curve may be something like this. Hey, I have a request to all of you. Please try to join on time. It's highly distracting to kind of accept people when I'm in the middle of the class. Kindly accept this request of mine. And also sit in a place where you have a good internet connection so that you don't get drop off and keep coming back. Okay. So, yeah, where was I? Yeah, so one is the desired curve of CO2 emission, which is supposed to reduce with time. So by 2020, it needs to have a particular trajectory, and this dotted one is the actual one. This dotted one is the actual one. Now, this gap between actual and desired, are you able to see this? This is the emission gap. Is this clear? So I've just tried to convert a sentence into a graph so that the recall factor is better. So that is the emission gap report. Very simple. Now, 2020 had a very interesting area that the emission gap had chosen. You know what it had chosen? It had chosen 2 sectors, aviation and shipping, where it is really difficult to pinpoint that emission of that CO2 that gets emitted from an aeroplane or from a ship. In which country should you put it? Should you put it in the source or in the destination? If so, how much? So if an aircraft takes off from Delhi airport, does the emission belong to India? You may say, yeah, because it is taking off from India. But I say, no, what if the aircraft belongs to Emirates? Yeah, and it is going to Dubai. So then you may have for the first time, the emission gap report has focused on 2 areas where the emission that is emitted, it is not included in any country's NDC. Now that's a very interesting thing. So where will you put if it is not included in any country's nationally determined contribution? Where will you put? So that is an area that emission gap report is trying to assess. The emission gap report also says because of COVID, though there has been a brief dip in emission, but it says in the long term there is going to be no change. We all know in COVID the economical activity had completely come to standstill. No aircraft, therefore no emission from aircraft. No buses and trains and local cars or 2-wheelers, therefore no emission from vehicles. But at the same time, thermal power plants are still running, right? Because we all were having electricity all through the year. The paddy cultivation was still happening, which means methane emission was still happening. Okay, so some amount of emission was still happening. There was a slight reduction. So what this report says is it has no significant impact. Now the report also says that many countries have pledged what is called as a net zero pledge. So net zero pledge means what it says is, and we will talk about this concept of net zero emission when we come to India and climate change, that topic. But more and more countries are committing to the fact that we will have a net zero emission by mid of this century, which is 2050. India is very reluctant. We will see India